Good. How are you, man?
Make sure that the audio is good. One sec. Speaker. Cool. That should be working. Yeah. Test. Yep. Can you hear me okay?
I definitely can.
Nope, no, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Check. Can you hear me now?
Try talking.
Can you hear me now?
No, I can't. Okay, I'm gonna just disconnect this. Well, I can try this. One sec. No, I'm just gonna disconnect it.
How does that work?
Yeah, now it works, but I'm just worried that the audio won't be pitch perfect.
Oh, that's all right. My podcasts are never perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. So, how was your day today?
It was good, man. It was good. Yeah, we're selling the course. So today's the last day to buy. So yeah, kind of intense, but I'm excited for this, man. I was thrilled that you reached out.
Are you calling from New York right now?
Yeah, exactly. Where are you?
I'm in central Wisconsin.
Cool,
So
man.
it's snowing here already, but I got my snow tires on, so I'm good to go, right?
Wow, crazy.
You said you're selling a course? Could you tell us more about that course?
Yeah, so I teach a course called Rite of Passage, and Rite of Passage is a global community of writers, mostly focused on nonfiction writing, who come together for a 5-week program where I compressed 5 years of ideas into 5 weeks of insights and information. So it is divided into 7 modules, and people learn to write. They learn to build their online infrastructure, and then they learn, once they have their online infrastructure and their writing, how to distribute their work and connect with other people and build an audience and build a network. So the building an audience side comes from mostly email. Email is still the best distribution system out there. And then building the network comes from teaching students how to build cold email and then amass an email list of the people and peers, really just peers and colleagues who matter most of their career.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, that kind of goes into, I guess, part of the questions I'm going to ask at some point. So first up, I mean, I don't have a whole bunch of listeners to my podcast. So, but if you would still, introduce yourself a little bit. I know I've met you obviously on the Praxis call, but if you just want to give your elevator pitch for us.
Yeah, for me as a person, yeah. So I run a online course called Rite of Passage and a podcast called the North Star Podcast. And Rite of Passage is exactly what I just described. The North Star Podcast, I've got to interview people from all different sectors of society. So there are founders of companies, investors, scientists, authors, just kind of build, I guess, bringing together a crazy stew of different people from all sectors of society for those interviews. And then I also write a lot. So this year I'll publish about 200,000 words on my website, which is the equivalent of roughly 2.5 books. And I don't spend a lot of time writing. So I publish a lot, and I consume a decent amount, I guess, but not so much. But I have just a super efficient system for converting both ideas that come into my brain into ideas, which are also inspired by just experiences that I have in the real world.
Okay, awesome. So how did you even get started on this whole idea of writing and publishing daily and having this podcast? Because from my understanding, that's what you do for a living now. It's just like you creating content and sharing it with the world, correct?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's really crazy. So, I mean, basically what happened was I was just the worst writer. I got horrible grades in school, and when I started working, I was not a good writer at all. And I received overwhelming feedback from teachers and my boss in my first job, and basically I needed to learn how to write. So I remember walking out of my boss's office one day, the guy's probably 6'3", kind of an intimidating guy, big beard, and basically I was walking out and I said, hey, how do I learn to write better? And he gave me some great advice. He said, well, I think that you should start by reading exceptional content and then just write more. Read really good books, works that have stood the test of history. And so through that, through this desire to learn how to write, I remember even when I was in college, my junior year, talking to a friend at the time, and I said, hey, I think this might be time to start taking writing tutoring. She had told me I was a horrible writer, and that wasn't something that I wanted. So at some point towards the end of university, I got really interested in ideas. And there's this great quote from Ira Glass, where he talks about how for the first 3 years when you make something, you're going to be frustrated. Because what happens is your ability is outpaced by your taste. And people get into any kind of work. Like take you with this podcast. You get into this podcast because you have good taste. And you listen to podcasts that you like, and you learn from people that you like, and you say, well, I want to do a little bit more of that. But what happens is when you first start, say your podcast isn't going to be as good. That's what happened for me. And it takes time to get up to where your taste is. And they never match up. I mean, all greatness in anything from sports to music to writing comes from how much further behind we are versus how far forward our taste is. And we're always trying to catch up to our taste. And as our ability improves, our taste gets better as well. And so what happened was I just had to develop a system of writing that worked for people like me who weren't naturally good writers. And I ended up building an entire system based off of, we can get into it, based off of speaking instead of actually typing, based off of getting out into the world and having experiences instead of trying to stare into the cursing black and white cursor on Microsoft Word when you try to sit down to write, and to get out into the world and to have experiences and to meet interesting people and to read great books and to go out into the world and then try to capture those ideas when you're out there so that by the time that you sit down at your computer, you can just fire off some words. So I've gone in 2.5 years from horrible writers and creative block to now being creatively uninhibited. And I try to share that with the world.
So you said you did have writer's block at one point when you started, right? It was difficult. And after, watching how you constructed that little article in our Zoom call, the one with Praxis a couple weeks ago, to me, it seemed like to you, writing isn't you relying on your own, at that moment, am I inspired? It was kind of like, okay, let's sit down and let's write this article. And it literally didn't matter what topic we chose. You wrote something that you had no idea, we didn't plan at all, and we usually just wrote this nice article, or at least the outline of it. And so how do you, how many months of writing, or, at what point, I guess is the question, did you feel like you switched over from that spot to that productive?
Yeah, I mean, it's a gradual process. So it's just been slowly but surely. I think this year has been pretty big, but basically I've gone back and I've studied a lot of the late 20th century literature of manufacturing. And what you find in manufacturing is that a lot of the cutting edge didn't see a trade-off between quality and quantity. And so I fundamentally believe that you can have more of both. We generally say, well, you can either have more quality or more quantity. And I'm saying, actually, you can publish more and write better content. And that comes from an idea that I have called the content triangle, which basically what you want to do is test out your ideas in as many ways as possible before you actually publish them. Because feedback loops, especially fast, honest, and reliable feedback loops, are one of the fastest ways to improve, whether you want to improve a skill or whether you want to improve an idea. And so say that the goal ultimately is to publish an exceptional book. Well, traditionally, we would have what I guess you could call the Thoreau model. And what the Thoreau model is it's going into a cabin in the woods and being at Walden Pond like Thoreau, and what was it, like 1850 or so, and he's there for 2 years, and he writes Walden, and he comes back and returns, and he had basically been away from society for 2 years. Well, I say, well, let's flip that. Let's do the opposite. Let's be hyper engaged in terms of online communities and in terms of interacting with the world, and use those interactions to get feedback. And then what you end up having is you're getting feedback in conversations. So conversations like this, I might have a new idea that's fairly interesting, and then you say, oh, wow, that's a really interesting idea. So I make a mental note, that's a good idea. Okay. So then I do that 2 or 3 times, and I talk to 3 people who think that idea is interesting. Each time I change the wording and the phrasing and the structure of what I'm trying to say, and maybe I'll share it on Twitter. Maybe I'll share it on my email list. And then if I get some good responses, then maybe I'll write a blog post about that. So what I'm always trying to do is run all these ideas through the mill of expression and to get feedback. And by doing that, what we do is I provide shape to ideas. So the way that ideas are made is what you want to do is just like a statue. You might want to start with a big piece of stone, a big piece of marble. And then what you're always doing is you're chiseling the ideas so that you're taking away, for example, anything that might not look like the statue of David. And what you're doing is you're just chiseling away piece by piece by piece until you end up with something beautiful. And you do that through feedback and by talking to people.
Wow, that's awesome. So, I mean, typically, how long do you stew on an idea and get feedback on it before you make it into a blog post? Like, is it a day? Is it a couple of days? A week? Weeks? Who knows?
It depends, man. I mean, like it'll go from a couple years to instant. I mean, this morning, like yesterday, I ran a Spartan race, and it was a interesting experience. It's basically just like a run that you do. We did it on a ski slope. You have to go through all these obstacles. You got to climb ropes. You got to jump over fire. You got to carry like a 50-pound box or bucket on your shoulder for 100 yards. And you got to carry a 60-pound bag. You got to climb over all these obstacles. You got to swim through muddy water and stuff like that. And it's just a vibrant community. And so I said, last night I had the experience. Then I talked to my friends after who I ran the race with. I said, okay, what are the things that we can infer from Spartan races about how to build community? Then last night I was walking on the Upper East Side in New York City, speaking to my phone, transcribing what I said. And I said, basically, this is how they get you to pay on your way out. This is how they build a community. This is how, like, they don't focus on affiliate links. They then focus on friend referrals instead, built up all of these ideas by speaking them out. Then today, sat down at my computer and published them in my newsletter, right? So that was 24 hours from idea to publish. Whereas sometimes, for example, I'm working on an essay right now called What Happened to the News, where I'm trying to trace the history of the news all the way back from the Philadelphia Gazette in like the 17th, 18th century, all the way till now, when we just have news everywhere. I mean, we're swimming in information. We're consuming way too much BS news that quite frankly isn't worthy of our attention. And what's going on there? And so that is the kind of thing where I've been compiling notes for years. And I mean, I studied that in school when I was in college. So in some capacity, I've been compiling notes of that for 7 years.
Wow. So one thing that I'm very curious about is how did you go about, step by step, if you could kind of, give a general step-by-step of how you took your writing and podcast, whatever it was, all of your content creation, and then turn it into actually a way to make money and to provide for yourself while you can do all of these great things, traveling and just being able to dedicate your attention to creating content.
Yeah, I mean, look, there were a lot of steps. I couldn't possibly do justice to all the difficult moments of that. I mean, I just want to say it's really hard. I think it requires a certain kind of person to be able to do this. This isn't for somebody who just wants to work from 9 to 5. I mean, it's past 6 o'clock right now, the sunset. I haven't been outside all day. I'm not going to even see the sun today. So I was lamenting that right before the call. And I don't want to say that how hard you work guarantees how successful you're going to be, because that's not true at all. But at the same time, there is a level of obsession and intellectual obsession that I have over ideas and learning and creating, where I need that, man. I really need that. And for me, that's my life. And I would be miserable if I didn't do this. But so many people look at what I do and they say that sounds terrible. And so even though I do get to travel, even though I have control over my time, like I didn't go do anything fun on Halloween this year, right? Like it was Thursday night, I was working, and so I just want to preface it there. But one thing, I'm going to kind of just reframe the question into something a little bit more specific. And I think that one thing that I fundamentally believe is that cities are a incredible vehicle for economic opportunity. And the biggest benefit that I've had was spending time in New York. New York is, if you look at the second law of thermodynamics, like people fall, this isn't an exact definition of it, but you could phrase it like this, that people become their environment. And so I think it's important to curate who you're with, where you're living, and the kinds of people you surround yourself with. And it's been an absolute gift to live in New York. I did 2 summers interning in New York between my sophomore year of college, my junior year of college, and then junior to senior year again. And especially that first summer was not a good time. It was really miserable because I realized, quite frankly, how incompetent I was and how little I knew about the world, and also how terrible my work ethic was. But at the same time, it was a splash of cold water that knocked me into shape. And I think New York has perpetually been that. New York has always been a place where I've confronted my own limitations, where I've been forced to grow up and to challenge myself, and I've been surprised by just how competent people are. And it's been an arduous journey to get here, but also one that's been beautiful in the struggle, in that I've gotten through living in New York to meet exceptional people. And I think that this just comes from living in cities. I think cities are the hotbeds of economic opportunity. We thought that cities were going to become less important with the internet, when in fact they've become more important. Also in terms of the few industries that are experiencing real productivity growth, such as finance and technology, we're seeing higher and higher returns in those creative industries to intellectual clustering. And we've seen that over time. If you look at writers groups in the early 20th century, and you just take the counterfactual of ones who moved to London and ones who didn't move to London, people who moved to London saw about an 11% productivity growth. And so what we've seen over the long arc of humanity, from the city-states in Greece to living in New York City here today, we've seen that cities are a hotbed for economic opportunity. But one of the biggest pieces of low-hanging fruit that we're facing in society right now is the challenges that we have in cities, in that our public transportation is too slow, which isn't allowing people to get into cities. We have this rampant time inequality in terms of how long it takes some people to commute versus others. And it didn't used to be like that 40, 50 years ago, because poor people used to live in cities and wealthier people used to live outside of the cities and commute. And so you had this kind of balancing effect within the system. But now what's happened is you have the ultra wealthy in the cities, and then you have poor and poorer people moving out, and then you have fairly wealthy people in the suburbs. And so we have this new system of how people live. And for those people out in the suburbs, I mean, my goodness, some of them are commuting an hour and a half. And with the standard deviation of their commute times, as you go farther and farther with unreliable transportation, it gets higher and higher. So if your average commute is an hour and a half, you need to leave, say, 2 hours and 15 minutes early to account for the potential of a 45-minute delay. So that's the first issue. And then also we have crazy zoning restrictions, where if you look at a photo of San Francisco, my goodness, the vast majority of San Francisco, I think 78.6% of San Francisco is restricted against apartments. And now that restriction varies. So in some places it's easier, some places it's very difficult. It's not binary. But at the same time, if you look at San Francisco, which you've seen one of the greatest pieces of wealth creation in world history, it's still a city with less than 1 million people. And so we are artificially constraining how many people are getting to cities. We're making it hard for people to commute into cities, which is driving value up, prices up, because cities are so valuable. And so it's one of the great tragedies in societies right now that we don't have more people into cities. But I fundamentally believe that it's important to do what I call find the fast flow and end up in a place where there's economic opportunity.
That's a very interesting perspective. I've never heard that. I grew up in the middle of pretty much nowhere, so I have a lot of uncles and people who believe that city life is definitely not for them, and a lot of times criticize city life. But I actually think that's a very interesting perspective. I've never really thought about it that way.
Yeah, I mean, hold on. Let's just stay on this. This is fairly interesting. I'm not saying that cities are for everybody by any means. It's just that in terms of my own experience and in terms of if you were to take the base rates of wanting to have a lot of opportunity and to do the kind of work that I do, being in cities is almost unquestionably the answer. But you have to take all those qualifications beforehand.
Correct.
But there are plenty of ways to be super successful in other places, in the rural countryside. And I know a lot of people who live in places like Boise, Idaho. Bozeman, Montana is an amazing place. And totally get why people live there too. I just fundamentally believe that as a society, we're making it too hard to get people who want to be in cities, maybe like you.
Yeah, that's something I'm definitely considering to do in the very near future here. Would you say, that quality of life is decreased by living in city at all? I mean, because obviously we're talking about, it seems to me we're talking about the maximum output we can have, like productivity, right?
Right.
You have, obviously, if you're surrounded by more people who are constantly, on the go. I spent a week in New York and I really enjoyed it there. I wasn't sure if I would want to live there my whole life, but I definitely feel like it'd be someplace I'd like to visit for longer. But if you're surrounded by this constant, motion, essentially, then you're naturally going to be more productive, and you're at least appearing to be more productive. So
Yes.
Do you think that there's at any point does it cross over and make your quality of life, especially for people with a family? Because I come from a Catholic community where family is obviously the center of everything, right?
Amazing.
And do you think that it's, I mean, just give me your thoughts, I suppose, on the quality of life, et cetera, for families in cities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that quality of life is a very weird measure in the way that we talk about it. I think that one thing that I love about the central part of America and the time that I've spent in places like Missouri and Wisconsin and Michigan, where I spent a month this summer, is that the family plays a much more central role in life. And I think that's very healthy. And you have communities that bring people together, and religious communities. I've seen time and again, I have a lot of friends who are Christian and Catholic, and some of the communities that they're able to build outside of cities are just really beautiful. I don't have a lot of that. With that said, I mean, look, quality of life, we generally talk about quality of life with the implicit assumption that better quality of life means that it's just really easy to do things and it's cheap. And I get that. But like, I wouldn't want that at all. Like for me, what I want quality of life is to be able to meet really cool people, to have access to really interesting opportunities, to be able to go to great museums, to go out and to be in a place that inspires me, and to feel like I'm in the center of it all is just like, for me, that's what I want in quality of life. And so I guess I take issue with the quality of life term, but at the same time, I love how faith and the family and friendship and small group communities are valued in the center of the country. And that is something that cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York should learn from.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. Obviously, we have anybody can choose. I don't care who you are. In my opinion, everybody has the opportunity and the ability to choose where to live in the world today. I know that there's probably a few exceptions to that, but I think that overall in America, pretty much anybody, if they really want to, say they want to go to a less busy place than New York, etc., then they can. And that's why I a lot of times take issue with the idea of us trying to make, say for example, New York. Like, we can't make New York ideal for family life, right? That's not the point of New York, like you said, right? There's different places, and we have variety in the world, so we should choose individually where we want to be with attention. So. Um, let's move on to a little bit different topic. So Jay Daniel from Praxis, he's in my month. He had wanted me to ask this question, which is, what are your biggest tips for launching a successful podcast?
Have good audio quality, find good guests, and don't talk to the guests about the things they normally talk about.
I think I'll take that advice. I'm not entirely sure of what you normally talk about. I do know that you're pretty well known for your writing. That's why I do have a couple other questions here that I think would be slightly off of that. What, I know you touched on it a little bit, but what do you think that your purpose in life is? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, but what do you think that your why is?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, what I kind of try to do is, I guess I frame it a little bit differently. I don't really think through it in that way as much. I think of it much more in terms of, it's just hard to make it in cities. And so I've really had to focus on what my competitive advantage is for what the market needs. And then what can I uniquely provide to the market and provide value to the world, and then capture some percentage of that value, which becomes profit for my business. And so right now I haven't focused a lot on purpose. But I do believe that my business, when I make money, it is very well aligned with society becoming better. And that is basically the most important thing to me. And so, like, for me, just building a business is the thing. And so I want to be able to profit in the way capitalism should work, in a way that benefits society at large. And that's really been my focus for now. And I just fundamentally believe that, like, writing online is just one of the biggest secrets in the world right now. The number of people who write online is at least 1 or 2 orders of magnitude off for where it should be. Writing is a tremendous craft in terms of what it does for your own psyche and the way that it sharpens your thinking. And I'm not sure that I have a why that will stand over the course of my life. But right now, my why is teaching people how to write and getting them to learn how to build networks online through writing. And I'm really happy doing that, man. Really happy doing it.
Yeah, one of the things I enjoy too is writing and making my podcasts. I don't have a lot of people who read and listen to them, but I do know that I enjoy it, and that's why I keep doing it. I don't do it because I'm trying to get, a certain audience or a certain attention. I just do it because I do believe firmly that every person's perspective can be helpful to at least one other person in the world. And if everybody shared their perspective, I think that the world would be a much better place.
Yeah.
How did you go about building and growing your audience, both on your podcast and your blogging?
Yeah. So, I focus on a lot of these things in Rite of Passage. But I would say that the biggest thing is just tapping into individuals who have really helped me and propelled me. There's been a guy named Tyler Cowen, who's an economist at George Mason University. He runs the Mercatus Center there, used to write for the New York Times, now writes for Bloomberg. And Tyler has funded me, and he's been a tremendous influence on me in terms of distributing my work and in terms of helping me grow my audience. And one of the big things is just finding readers who have fairly big names who can help you push out your content. That is always one of the big goals, because there is like audience inequality is huge, right? And so you gotta find the people who do have big reach, and those people are big helpers. But then also just improving, like a ruthless improvement. My stuff is so much better than it was 3 years ago, and 3 years from now it will be so much better than it is now. Just really hard work and ruthless dedication to improving my craft.
So how do you measure the quality of a post? I mean, because I would argue that since everything is, especially with art and writing, that it's relative, and it just, if you have a lot of readers, that would mean it's pretty good. But you could also have a lot of readers and it would be English, as far as an English teacher is concerned, wouldn't be good, right? So how do you measure that? Or do you think that it is equal, that you have a large audience if you have quality writing?
Quality is almost certainly not relative. Quality is there are certainly things that are better than others.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that things are relative, at least for a writer, is an unhealthy one. With that said, there are things that aren't very good that some people can like, and things that are good that others wouldn't like. But especially with writing, there is certainly good writing and bad writing, and you can tell what's good writing versus bad writing within seconds of reading a post, generally within the first paragraph. And you just pick up your pattern recognition. Are these sentences easy to read? Does the structure flow well? Is it an interesting idea in the first place? Is somebody pulling on a thread that others aren't pulling on? Are they seeing the world with a different lens? Are they diving deep in a way that nobody's ever dove deep before? Are they showing you a perspective that you've never seen before or never had the tools to grasp? Or are they just totally wasting your time and providing meaningless information in the first place, or commuting it in a way that's verbose and hard to understand and dense to a fault? There, in writing, quality is not very relative, and you realize that when you have as many students as I do, and when you work as hard at this craft as I do.
Okay. So how are some ways, do you have any specific resources, besides your course? Obviously, that'd be an interesting thing for me to look into. Do you have anything that is kind of the standard, or something, some good examples, some good resources of really good quality writing?
Yeah. I would recommend a blogger named Dan Wang. He writes, he lives in China, and he just moved to Beijing. He lived in Hong Kong for a while, has some experience working in hedge funds. Now he works for a company called Gavakal doing research there, and he's one of the world experts in the Chinese semiconductor industry and manufacturing. And my goodness, you just read his work, and you'll see that quality is absolutely a thing. It's just the cadence of his words and the precision of his thoughts and the depth of his expertise is something that I aspire to, and every single time I read it, it humbles me to pieces.
Okay, I will definitely check that out. You said Dan Wang?
Yeah, Dan Wang.
Okay, so do you have a goal that you set for each week, how often to publish? Or do you publish every day? Do you publish multiple times per day?
No, I write every day. So I publish a Monday newsletter called Monday Musings, a Friday newsletter called Friday Finds, and then I just try to publish as much as I can. I've been working on a lot of long essays. So my Monday Musings is just typing up shorter things. But I'm working on a long essay right now, as I mentioned, called What Happened at the News. And so I'll actually work on that right after this, where I just try to write for a minimum of 60 minutes per day, usually up to 90, but just try to make sure to get something on paper every single day. The goal is to write every day, because a day spent not writing is the true enemy of being prolific. And it's just like working out, where your brain, just like your body in a workout, doesn't have unlimited capacity. You can't do good thinking for more than generally 90-minute spurts. And so what I do is I just try to get one of those in per day. And over time, it helps me just become a prolific writer.
Okay. So for me, one thing that's really helped is having a morning routine. I've developed it after I started. My roommates moved out, so I had the whole place to myself, and I was able to get a good sleep schedule. But if you travel a lot, how do you have some kind of morning routine that you've set up that you can take anywhere you go, essentially?
I don't. I really don't. I would love to say I do. I have zero morning routine. My routine is to wake up and to convince myself to somehow get out of bed. I love to sleep. I nap every single day too. I I think sleep is just the greatest thing ever. I wish I could do it twice as much. Um, my goal for waking up is to just somehow get myself downstairs to make a coffee, and then somehow get myself to open my computer and start working. And then once I start working, I can generally get going, but I do not have a morning routine.
Yeah. Okay. Have you ever heard of, you mentioned sleep. Have you ever heard of Matthew Walker, his book,
Yes, of course.
Why We
Why we
Sleep?
sleep?
Yeah. You should, if you could, you should try to interview him. He's a very, very
Yeah.
interesting person. I
Yes.
love his work.
Yeah, me too.
Um, yeah, I was refreshed on his, because I had read his book or I listened to everything on Audible. I listened to it at the beginning of the year, and then I had heard a podcast that he was on with Joe Rogan just recently, and I was like, oh, I should probably re-implement all of those things.
Yeah, you should listen to his 3-part, 6-hour series with Peter Attia. It's one of the greatest podcasts I've ever heard.
Okay, I'll have to check it out. Um, one thing, so could you define a specific moment and kind of tell the story of it? I'm sure there is a story behind when you essentially had, I guess you could call it your breakthrough moment where you finally felt like, wow, this is what I'm supposed to do, with this life that you're living now, right? Was there a time where you realized, wow, I actually can write well, or you got a lot of reads or something like that? Just some kind of moment that you think was very defining in this in getting you to where you are now.
Yeah, I think that one of the big defining moments was when I realized this was after my sophomore year of college. I was working for a company called Skift. I was their first intern. They're a travel news and data company, and we were in New York City, and I was the first ever intern there, and I was on the sales team. And I just made mistake after mistake after mistake working at this internship. And I walked in one morning after messing up the email that we had sent out to 35,000 subscribers the day before. And I just walked in and I spoke to my boss, and he was like, do you even want to be here? Is this something that you want to do? And that moment made me realize that I had to grow up and improve a lot and to just become a lot more competent. I think that I didn't really realize how important competence was when I was in college before that. And living in New York and seeing the delta between where I was and where other people were, and just how little I knew about the world, was a real waking up moment for me.
Nice. What is one thing that you wish more people did?
Right.
Right. That's kind of an obvious answer, but I wasn't sure if there'd be something more deep.
Right
Um,
online.
um, what are your thoughts? I had kind of tossed this idea around one time with one of the Praxis advisors, and I think you may have already answered it in some of my other earlier questions. But what are your thoughts on using abbreviations when you write blog posts? Slang type terms, right? I'll let you
It
see what you have
depends.
to say.
It really depends. I mean, it's really important with writing to not constrain people in the wrong way. And it just depends. I mean, it depends on the voice that you're going for, the audience that you want to attract, and how you want to come across in your writing. I mean, also different kinds of writing. You want different kinds of verbiage. It really depends. It really depends on so many factors.
But it's not something that should be completely tossed out the window.
Oh,
As an
absolutely
idea.
not. I mean,
Okay.
absolutely not. No way.
Because that's one thing. What really came down to it when I was having the conversation was that if I'm writing with those type of slang terms, for example, abbreviating because with BC. And the advisor had said to me, well, it depends on who you're trying to attract, right? If you're trying to impress hiring managers, that's not going to go over so well because most of them
That's
are
true.
older people who are going to be like, what does this even mean?
That's true.
And that's also something, because I was battling with this in my mind, is I would like to, if I can, write some type of valuable book for anybody who's Gen Z age before I turn 21, which is not too far away. So hopefully I get on that soon. But um, um, okay, we'll get off here pretty soon. But I was trying to battle with that idea of, should I try to attract these readers so that I can get some kind of following, so that when I put the book out there, even if it's a small book, would they read it then? You know what I mean? So
Yeah, I mean, for something like that, I probably wouldn't use slang and abbreviations. I would just try to pursue quality in whatever sense that means for you, and to write the thing that you wish existed.
okay. All right. So one last thing. What would be your biggest piece of advice to any person, any young person, but specifically, as they're just getting towards the end of their high school?
Yeah, I think I'd say you're going to have to work way harder than you need to. You're going to have to work way harder than you think you do. And you're also going to need to be more competent than you think you need to be. So go find the skills that you have that the world needs, that you also enjoy working on. And through that, serve the world with your work, and you will, through that process, be able to find meaning in your life and be able to put food on the table for yourself and be able to serve the world. But make sure that you're serving other people with your work. Otherwise, it won't be nearly as fulfilling as it could otherwise be.
Well, that's a good ending statement. I think that's really important. I think so many people become so selfish in our world. At least that's what I've experienced. And it's the people who give all the time who feel very fulfilled. So,
Right? That's one of the that's some of the great wisdom of Christianity right there.
yep. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time, David. I know you got a busy schedule, but thank you so much. And you have a great rest of your night.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for reaching out.